Hold on, there's like a very big boat passing by my apartment. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. So we're suddenly halfway through season 2 of the podcast. Next month is already October, which means it'll be time for our quarterly community donation. For the first episode of each quarter, January, April, July, and October, I'll be donating $1 per patron to an organization of our choosing. If you'd like to suggest an organization for our community to support that aligns with our vision and values, send me an email at greetings@breakfastinbeauclair.com or comment on Patreon. Speaking of our global community, thank you to our producer-level patrons for continuing to support the show. Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Eric's the Godling, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Julie, Sylvia of Skellige, Jameson, Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Jacob Meeks, Sebastian von Novigrad, Charlotte from Vengerberg Glamorai, Red Kite, The Original Roach, Ariel Kitty, The One True Chef, Dustin, and Chris K. of Covier. As producer-level patrons, they receive an introduction shout-out, a spot on the website, bonus content after every episode, stickers, an enamel pin set, an exclusive producer gift from partner Emily at Morrison Norris, and producer credits in each and every episode. If you'd like to explore becoming a patron of the show, head over to patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Charlie from Austria and Jess S. from the US call in for the first half of episode 105, Bottled Appetites, from Netflix's The Witcher. Join us as we analyze Geralt and Yennefer's motivation in this adaptation of The Last Wish. Jess breaks down the visual effects used throughout the episode, we debate the use of nudity and sexuality in relation to the plot and storytelling, and we put out a call for marketable Witcher merchandise and cake. In our mid-episode news segment, Tidings from Toussaint, Lars from Witcherflix shares tons of behind-the-scenes details from Season 1 of the Netflix show, as well as production updates for Season 2. Without further ado, let's get to the discussion for The Witcher, Episode 105, Bottled Appetites, Part 1. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name's Alyssa, and joining us today are Charlie from Austria and Jess from the US. Hey guys.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Charlie. I work in media, online media, at a publishing company, and I'm a freelance music journalist. I studied musicology and then journalism for my master's degree.
So what kind of music journalism do you specialize in specifically?
I specialize in rock music and metal music. I write for a print magazine and go to concerts, write live reviews, album reviews, just new releases. Yeah, it's fun.
No, that's really awesome. Is there a specific aspect of rock or metal that really drew you into writing for that?
I just figured I love writing. I love this kind of music. So why not combine the two and see where it takes me?
I guess in your years of writing, what have been some of the standout moments that have made your career something that you were really passionate about?
2 years ago, I got to interview over the phone a musician I really admire. So that was definitely the highlight so far. We talked for like 40 minutes or something. And, I asked him about the new album and it was just so great.
What musician was it, and why was that interview so special for you?
Do you know Alter Bridge?
Nope, but I'd love if you told me more about
Okay,
that.
I'm sorry. Okay, so he's the singer from a band I really like. They're from the US and they play hard rock music. And at a concert of theirs, I met my best friend.
Aww.
So really special. And
what is something that most people wouldn't know about being a music journalist?
It doesn't always come easy writing these things, because sometimes when you see a gig and maybe it wasn't what you hoped it would be, then you have to kind of, stay objective and not let your passion for the band itself or the music itself take over, and just, be able to point out bad things as well. You have to kind of keep your distance a bit and look at it from the big picture, and that can be challenging.
Mm-hmm. Because you're also an avid fan of the Witcher series. That's, why you and I connected, and that's why you're here.
How has your experience as a music writer impacted your relationship with the Netflix series?
Being a music writer just means that I pay a lot of attention to the music. It just comes naturally to me. It's one of the first things I notice. Then you have to watch it again and again and again to really get all of it, because there's so much going on at the same time, of course. You know, you don't want to miss the action just because you were trying to figure out what the music was, you know. So, and then also, of course, with like the games, I own all the soundtracks. I listen to them religiously. And it's just, it's a very, very important aspect of the game to me. And without the music, the game or the show wouldn't be what it is. So it's just such a significant part of it all.
Yeah, I've been super fortunate that like Sonia Belousova herself has been incredibly forward about sharing behind the scenes content, backstories to each of the soundtracks, like everything that you could possibly imagine through like Twitter and Instagram.
They obviously had a really good time.
Yeah. You know, it's nice that not only can we get an understanding of the kind of work that was done on the show, but that just by watching it and just through assumptions, but they're actually very proactive about engaging the audience, which is really nice. And Jess, how would you describe your role?
I work in post-production in editorial, so that's picture editing. I'm an assistant editor on a show right now, so that means we deal with, dailies and actually cutting the show. As an assistant editor, part of your job is you're the hub for sending things to the composer, sending things to sound for sound effects and dialogue editing, sending things to VFX, and then getting them back, in the case of VFX, and checking them to make sure they look correct before it gets sent to the executive producers to approve it. That's how I have some knowledge about VFX. So I'm not a VFX expert. I'm more of like picture editing, like cutting the episode. I love it, obviously, and I can notice things in a show. I'll probably have a lot to say about VFX, I think, and how I think they did them. But I can give you sort of my best guess at how they created them.
So for some of our audience who might be unfamiliar with the world of like post-production for television and film, what could you tell us kind of about the moving parts or the ecosystem of post-production?
I'll probably just talk about television because that's what we're talking about here, and that's mostly what I've worked on. Television, it's the executive producer, so in the case of The Witcher, Lauren Hissrich, is the final say. Of course, like Netflix has input. All the decisions come down her saying yes or no or changing things. So I would say in like a feature film, that job goes to the director of the film. In television, it's the showrunner. We get dailies in for a show. Editor puts the show together, obviously using the script and notes they've gotten from set. Then the director gets to come in and do their notes. Maybe some camera thing they shot that they really want to put in there, or some take they really like. You know, it kind of depends on the director. Then it gets sent to the producer. So it would get sent then to like Lauren and the other executive producers. I know she said the scripts on this show are really long in the first season, so she would have had to make decisions about what to cut. And then it's the editor's job to make it work and make it so you don't notice that something was cut. Once that's done, it would get sent to Netflix. Netflix will give their input on what they think is working or not working. And studio notes, network notes tend to be more broad, kind of like, we feel Geralt doesn't seem stressed out enough. We really want to emphasize this part of the story. And then it's up to the executive producer and the editor to try and address that with the footage they have without losing whatever they like about what they've made so far. So it's a lot of like compromises and little fixes and things like that to make it work. But I would say the interesting thing about it, though, is probably like 70% of what the editor cuts in their first pass is what's in there at the end. It's actually not a ton overall changes. There's usually like certain scenes or certain moments that get really worked on because they're like the important moments of the episode and stuff like that. In the end, it's Lauren's show. So in the end, sort of these decisions are her decisions about what sort of ends up in there. There's some guidance from the network because they're the ones putting it out and paying for it and all that.
Today we'll be discussing Bottled Appetites, the 5th episode in Netflix's first season of The Witcher. This episode adapts Andrzej Sapkowski's short story The Last Wish, in which Geralt and Jaskier meet the sorceress Yennefer for the first time. Meanwhile, the events in the present focus on new Nilfgaardian efforts to capture the missing Cintran princess, Ciri. In Geralt and Yennefer's timeline, Geralt attempts to find medical aid for Jaskier, who was severely injured in a djinn attack. His search leads him to Yennefer, who, unbeknownst to the Witcher, wants to capture the djinn in an attempt to cure her infertility. When we first open Geralt and Yennefer's timeline, Yennefer is approaching a sorcerer for an infertility treatment. We're not sure what. He ultimately tells her that she's short, but she's found herself in a location where magic is banned, and she's able to make money on essentially a black market for magic.
The design of this shop is one of, like, my favorite things that happens in fantasy stories, where it's like a store where you're like, this looks like nothing in here would be useful at all. It's just a bunch of, like, time turners or something. But, like, fantasy shows and stuff love that stuff, where it's just random things. You're like, they're magical. It's a magical store. So I like it. My favorite thing in the scene, actually, is Yennefer's dress. And you don't get to see enough of, like, the design on the back of that dress. I didn't notice it until I turned, like, the brightness up on my TV. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So Yennefer's off the grid now. It's a very modern term for it, but...
Yeah, because they don't have electricity.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of an odd phrase for her to use in dialogue.
Apparently, Lauren Hissrich, the showrunner, she gave her a green light for them to do that because they wanted to kind of incorporate these modern elements to it. And off the grid is not the only modern term we hear throughout the first season. You know, there's Jaskier saying things like sexy and stuff, which is probably not very medieval fantasy-like as well, so...
Right.
But I like that they do that. I think that's what The Witcher is. It's like this weird combination of, yes, it's medieval fantasy, but it's also very reflective of modern times and the way people behave. And I think that's the way the books are, too. Even if they don't use modern language, I think that's the vibe of the property. There's things about it that feel very modern, like people's actions and the way they treat each other and the humor in weird situations. So I don't mind that stuff. I think it fits kind of the quirky feel of the show.
Doesn't take itself seriously, and that's the important part.
Yeah, that's the one thing that does a nice job of, like, translating from the books for the most part. The books are so self-referential and very meta and, like, very weird. And so it's nice to see that some of that got translated.
So I think it fits pretty well.
I mean, the outcome of Yennefer's conversation with this mysterious sorcerer is that ultimately she starts giving magical consultations. So she has a line outside the door, and when we see her, she's giving a consultation to a couple with erectile dysfunction, which she then cures with what's basically I don't know anything about drug culture. What is it?
Honor's trailers referred to this as boner weed.
Yeah, so good.
I think it's good to show this, too, because it's sort of referenced in the books at times that that's how she makes money, is doing magic for people dealing with reproductive health, pregnancy, all that stuff, because that's something she's really invested in for herself. So, of course, she would get really, really good at it and then help other people with it. So I'm glad that they had that in the show. That couple was really cute, actually. I thought the scene was really nice.
They're German actors.
What did he call her? Schnooky? Let's get out of here, Schnooky.
Schnooky, it translates to, I guess, sweetie pie.
Yeah, it was cute.
And I think her magical weed was a practical effect. It was like actually had a little smoke cartridge in there, and it actually she was actually blowing smoke in that guy's face.
And Charlie, you had a note about like the musical approach to that magic as well, right?
Yeah, I noticed that throughout the series they use wind chimes to reflect the magic musically, and that's actually a very common thing to do. I've noticed that in a lot of TV shows and movies that deal with magical situations. Wind chimes are kind of always in there.
Do you think there's like a reason for that, or is it more just kind of like an industry standard at this point, or is there like kind of a visceral...
I wonder how far back that goes in films, because it's definitely in the Harry Potter movies. I mean, the opening theme is like chimes.
I think it was even in like some older Disney movies where you had like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan and stuff like that. And it's just this very fairy quality that it has to it, this kind of otherworldly, you can't quite put your finger on it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like you can't see that someone did something, but the wind blows and you hear wind chimes. So you've signaled that something is going on. It's definitely a way to cue the audience that like there's magical stuff happening.
Right. It's like, what movie is that? It's like, my love is like the wind. You can't see it, but you could feel it. I don't remember what it is, but I guess it's the same.
Actually don't know, but that's a cheesy line.
Oh, it's so, like, for some reason, I imagine John Cena saying it. Not for any good reason, but because he did a really excellent parody on SNL about being someone who was employed by someone who worked at an erotica bookstore. It's very silly, but yeah, that's what it reminds me of.
Hey, it's Late Night Alyssa. So this quote is 1000% from the 2002 classic, A Walk to Remember, starring Mandy Moore and Shane West, and was in fact not said by John Cena, but the link to John Cena's 2017 SNL sketch, Romance Bookstore, is in this episode's show notes at breakfastandbeauclair.com.
We kind of very briefly talked about the localization and the accent. Did you want to talk about that any further?
I think it's very interesting that they went, for whatever reason, with a German accent for the people in Rind. I'm wondering if they'll keep that up, because as you noted, Jess, Rind is in Redania in the books. We don't notice any particular, accents for, all the Nilfgaardians and stuff. So it's just this one town that has an accent. And, I mean, it's funny. And it's maybe a nod to the books where we have that, people from different backgrounds and regions talking, in this and that manner. But it was funny.
Yeah, that's interesting what you say about the Nilfgaardians not having a specific accent. Granted, we don't hear many Nilfgaardian characters speak. We hear Cahir and Fringilla throughout this episode, actually. The Nilfgaardian accent is supposedly strong in the books.
Then again, neither Fringilla nor Cahir are from Nilfgaard, are they?
Who knows anymore?
There's a book change.
Yep, that's going to be an interesting thing to tackle.
Those two, yeah, to see what they do.
Uh-huh.
After we kind of get a few of these scenes with Yennefer to establish the story and the setting, we're brought to a lake shore with Jaskier's voice opening up the scene. He meets Geralt, who is fishing for a djinn. Eventually, Geralt finds the djinn. He and Jaskier start fighting over the amphora that it's held in, breaking it and releasing the djinn to utter chaos as usual.
Obviously, there's a time jump. Jaskier talks about how they haven't seen each other in years. They didn't age Jaskier at all, so that's not very obvious. I think Lauren admitted that they should have made him look older. I don't understand why they randomly met at this lake. They could have done the entire story, but had them already hanging out and having this conversation. So it was kind of a strange choice. Not only is Geralt randomly know there's a djinn in the lake, but also randomly Jaskier just wanders by, and they're the only people at this lake. So I'm not sure why they had them sort of separated. But obviously they had to make changes here because there's a through line with the sleeplessness, Geralt's sleeplessness. That's a plot thing that they added that I think works very well. But they had to add that conversation about Jaskier calling him out on it. We're not inside Geralt's head to know how he's feeling, so we have to have this conversation. Jaskier calls him out on his guilt, or maybe he just doesn't want the responsibility and something that's really bothering him, that he has this child surprise now that he's avoiding, and it's really frustrating for him. So they had to add that, but I still think it's kind of weird that he and Jaskier weren't hanging out.
Then again, their friendship is so different. So maybe they didn't want them to be that close that they travel constantly. So they just happen upon each other by chance. Maybe it's destiny bringing them together on the show. Jaskier's throat needs a magical remedy. So that's the reason why they go seek out Yennefer in the first place. He brings up this dangerous witch that he's just seen. This is the only reason that Geralt asks about Yennefer and goes back to see her. So maybe there is a destiny component in there. So
yeah.
To go back to something that you said, Jess, what do you think it is about Geralt's sleeplessness as a plot point that is successful?
I think it allowed them to have a more concise first wish, because the first wish, the book turned into a whole long-running joke. You needed multiple characters to maintain. So they needed a different first wish, something very simple. It also gave us insight into where Geralt is as a character in terms of what he's dealing with internally, because again, not only are we not inside his head, but we don't have Yennefer reading his mind like she does in the books and knowing what he's thinking. If they had done that on the show, that would have been maybe another way you could have known how he felt about things, but we don't have that either. And he doesn't say much. So that's kind of the only way you can show his struggles. It also allowed for another element to Geralt and Yennefer's relationship later on. When he's with her, sleeplessness isn't an issue anymore. So it adds a nice little element to their relationship. So by doing that, they sort of gave themselves a nice, simple thing that they could use many ways to establish relationships and character and emotional places that they're in.
The reason why I questioned it, especially the first time, was, one, given my knowledge of the books, like, it seemed rather arbitrary that he would just be like, I'm restless. And it's like, but what do you need a genie for? So it's trying to decipher, like, as an audience, how honest is he being to himself, to Jaskier? How much truth is there to what he's actually saying versus what we actually have to decipher as an audience member?
Yeah, it also gives another element to the show, which is in the scene where he and Yennefer are talking in the bath. Geralt figures out something about her that she didn't tell him. He just knows from observing. And so this sleeplessness element gives something for Yennefer to know about him he didn't tell her. That's not really what's going on. There's something else going on that he's dealing with. So it gives them things to find out about each other, because they read each other very well. It gives something else for her to clock on him. So I think it serves a lot of purposes in the story. I think it worked really well, actually. And it shows that Geralt's sort of in denial, you know? He didn't want the child surprise, and he still doesn't want it, but he's kind of got a heart of gold, and so it does bother him that there's this kid out there that he's sort of rejected, he's not dealing with, yeah.
Which is, I think, also important to see for the audience that, yeah, he does care, and a reason why he claimed the child by accident in the previous episode, you know. He's not like this harsh, you know, hard exterior kind of dude who goes and takes away a baby or something, you know, and then doesn't care for her. He's a soft core.
If we're talking about, like, successfully adapting something in order to make it work for a different medium, I think adding this sleeplessness thing worked for this episode really well.
And Charlie, you had a couple notes about the way that the score moves through this scene as well.
Yeah, I just noticed the other day when I watched the episode again that the previous scene is in Brokilon Forest with Ciri and the Dryads. And as this scene ends and the Sword of Destiny is brought up, Geralt's theme starts swelling up in the background, and we can still hear it as we move into the lakeshore scene. And I think that's a nice touch, you know, mentioning the Sword of Destiny and then having Geralt's theme as a kind of, you know, preview on things to come, so to speak. That worked really well, I think. And then, of course, we hear it again throughout the scene when there's the action with the djinn going on and he had just attacked Jaskier, and Geralt is, again, you know, the one who saves his ass and arts the djinn away and stuff. So, yeah, I think that's another good example of how the music, you know, ties everything up really nicely.
They really did such a lovely, lovely job throughout the series with the score.
The first time we see the djinn, it doesn't look the way it's described in the books. They went with like a very black, smoky thing, which I thought was kind of interesting just because I was hoping for it to be a little bit more memorable looking, identifiable. Obviously, it doesn't have to look like Robin Williams' Genie in Aladdin, but like something with a little bit more menacing look. The way it's described in the book is kind of crazy too, but I think this was probably least expensive version of a djinn you could do on a TV show, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just put some black smoke in there.
It's kind of funny, like, looking back at the artwork that I originally did for The Last Wish back in, like, September, October. If you look at, like, episode 6, what I pulled for the artwork for that episode ultimately does look like what they went with for the show.
Oh, really?
Just this very, like, skinny, like, shadowy thing. And I was like, this is the closest I could find.
I mean, it makes sense if you're like, the djinn is kind of really the least important element of this story. It's just like a catalyst for what's happening. You don't need it to look crazy, but I would have liked it to be a little bit more. That golden dragon is pretty memorable, you know? Or like, even I'm sure Nivellen can picture that monster that Geralt fights, like the Lesher and stuff from the games.
To have a character or monster like that be incredibly memorable also adds like a branding aspect to the show that I think they don't always have. Like when you think about like monsters in Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, like they're all very brandable. Like you can make merchandise with them.
You probably wouldn't make a Striga, but you can't make a doll out of this smoky djinn. I agree with you. That's just missed.
I do kind of want a djinn birthday cake now, though. I hope someone's up for the challenge somewhere.
Oh my god. It's like negative carbs. It's like just made out of celery and smoke.
Perfect.
Black cotton candy.
Ooh, that's creative. I guess there's a little bit to talk through here. Geralt and Jaskier fight over this amphora. It breaks. Jaskier starts making wishes, like into the lake, in the direction that the djinn went. And Geralt gets cut and then shouts out for Jaskier to be quiet, and then Jaskier's throat just swells. And that's kind of where that lake scene ends. Geralt then rides to the closest town in search of a sorcerer or medical aid at all. He ends up in this medical tent with this elf. They pronounced it differently, I think, in the show than we did in the podcast. I think in the podcast we said Curaden. Did they say Chiraden in the show?
They said Chiraden, yeah. And I read the books in German when I first read them, so there was no reason for me to pronounce it like a ch. When I read it throughout the short story, every time I came upon his name, I kind of pronounced it differently than I did before. Kireadan, Kireden, something like that. It was really weird.
Well, everyone else in Rind is German, so maybe that is how it's supposed to be pronounced a little bit more like that, maybe.
Yeah, they didn't think this through at all.
Well, I think all of us are just generally in good company. Like, nobody knows how to pronounce anything in the Witcher universe.
The weird thing is, like, there's already an audiobook and a video game. So when they say things like Isaiah, I'm like, no one said it that way in any of the other properties. Why did someone on set go, we're going to change it?
Or Melitele.
That's in different ways throughout the show, which I don't mind because people do that in real life.
Yeah.
I think it would be very Witcher if it got a little meta and someone was like, wait, what? Oh, you know the temple. And they're like, oh no, Melitele or whatever.
Geralt tries to seek medical aid from this elf. I'm just going to call him Curaden. Could I do that? He seeks help from this elf, and the elf sends him off to a sorcerer in town. Before the elf can give him any additional information about who this sorcerer is, Geralt just rides off.
I did like in the end of that scene, like it's a little bit frantic. He's like making him an elixir and he's telling him, this is what you need and blah, blah, and Jaskier's like coughing and like, oh God. And then as soon as he's like telling him about this sorceress, his like line delivery is very slow. And you're like, this guy's dying, man. But it's just a nice way to show that, yeah, he has a serious soft spot for, at this point, unknown. Although I think most people watching the show figured out.
Yeah.
Although the way he describes her is like, she's malicious and blah, blah. And I'm like, let's say one nice thing about her. You're obviously in love with her.
Yeah, he doesn't really do a good job in either direction of telling Geralt this isn't a good idea, but also telling him that, like, this is the only person who can help you. He kind of flounders back and forth and then ultimately just isn't useful at all.
Yeah. I mean, the most useful thing he could have done is said, she's a really beautiful sorceress, but she will screw you over. So be very careful.
Watch out.
I mean, why didn't he just give him some actual advice?
With that, Geralt just kind of takes Jaskier and goes on his way. And presumably around the time that this is happening, we get dropped into Yennefer's quarters in Boberant's house. This is the man who arrested her earlier in the chapter. I don't even know if I mentioned that. When she was giving consultations, someone came in and arrested her. This is the mayor of Rind. In this scene, we're dropped into Yennefer's quarters, and Tissaia comes and visits her unexpectedly.
This was an odd scene. I think even the opening line about you like pain, I was like, what?
I didn't get it. I still don't get it, to be honest.
I don't know what she's referring to. I mean, she likes playing with people, I guess, to achieve her own ends, but it doesn't equate pain to me necessarily. And that's how they open the conversation, even though they haven't seen each other in like 20 years or something. But I guess if you live for hundreds of years, then that's not a very long time. So you can just pick up where he left off. Tissaia comes with very legitimate advice. She's like, you were working in Aedirn, now you're not, and you're doing all this stuff on your own, and people are noticing, and you might get in trouble, and here's an out. You can come back and work at Aretuza with me. And Yennefer's just very pleased with her in a way that I don't know that it's totally justified, especially when she offers to come back to Aretuza. Obviously, Yennefer has, like, feelings about that place and what she thinks of it, but to immediately throw that in Tissaia's face that I'm going to be better than you and blah, blah, it felt like something had happened that we didn't see or something. Something about it was a little bit off.
I was very out of the blue.
Yeah. I think there are a few moments of character development that we kind of miss and are, told about later throughout the series. So when we saw Yennefer in episode 3, Betrayer Moon, that was her at the end of her time at Aretuza, closing with her transformation and ultimately her acceptance into Aedirn's court. And then episode 4, Banquets, Bastards, and Burials, sees us now 30 years after that Aretuza banquet. So now we're maybe anywhere from like 40, 50 or so, after her time at Aretuza. And that banquet, we're told, is the last time that Tissaia has seen Yennefer.
Yeah, and you don't get a sense from previous discussions they've had that she would be that upset about what she did at the banquet, because she wanted her to go to Aedirn. Obviously, it sort of undermined what their plans were, but I don't think deep down she would have been that set that Yennefer sort of pulled this little stunt and got the posting she wanted. You know, you feel like on the inside Tissaia would have been like, even I'm saying her name both ways in this podcast, you feel like she would have been like, well, good for you, I guess, you know, as long as you're doing your job. So you don't get a sense that she'd be upset about that. And she came with very solid advice, very solid information about, you know, what the Brotherhood thought. So yeah, it feels like something was missing. There was some conversation they had that we didn't see.
Yeah.
I mean, unless Yennefer's supposed to just be sort of spiteful toward everyone. But again, there's nothing to show that that's the case either.
Maybe she's in a rebellious phase right now. I also kind of didn't understand why Tissaia asked her why she wanted a baby, because she knows that Yennefer has this, she's afraid of not having anyone's love, and that's even what she told her in Aretuza, is like, you lie, you deceive, blah, blah, blah. Even if you were beautiful, no one would ever love you. So she is actually kind of the first person who should know why maybe Yen would want someone to care for and to care about her. So
especially since she and Yennefer have a little bit of that relationship. And she has that with her students. You know, she says, Aretuza is all I have later on in the show. And it's like, she understands how important that is to mentor people and have those relationships.
Yeah.
But I can see her being kind of like a baby in the sense of like actually raising like an infant.
Yeah. yeah.
Nothing about Yennefer says that would be interesting to her, you know what I mean, on the surface. Yeah.
I think this is one of the things where, because the time jumps are so great, it sometimes is hard to see the connection and the character development from episode to episode. So we as an audience kind of have to fill in the gaps and assume how these characters have developed and what has triggered them. We're not really sure at what point Yennefer abandoned her post in Aedirn. We don't know if it was immediately after Queen Callis was assassinated. We don't know if it was a number of years or decades after. But we do know it's been long enough that the previous king has died.
How much she wanted to go there, and now she's getting the updates and she just does not care.
Yeah.
She really doesn't care.
I think that might be because we had heard in the previous episode, when she was initially talking to Callis in the opening scene, that she basically sees herself in the court as like a royal bottom wiper, for lack of a better term. So maybe she just felt purposeless there.
Yeah, I think she definitely did, yeah. A conversation like this fits into Yennefer's overall, her feeling useless or wanting different things and this and that. I think it works in that sense, but I think in terms of like, for the audience going from this point in the previous episode to this point in her relationship with Tissaia in this episode, that is where it feels like something was missing.
It's very, very quick.
And in the following scene, Yennefer eventually dismisses Tissaia. I think she says, like, you may go, Rectoress. Something really, really dismissive and very curt.
They always call her that when they're annoyed with her. They always say Rectress, all of them, when they're like done with her.
And so, yeah, Yennefer dismisses Tissaia. And the next scene that we get is Geralt riding up to Beauclair's home, in which he smacks, the porter, as he does in the books, with the money when the porter tells him that money opens all doors. Geralt brings Jaskier into the home, in which they run into the man of the house, Beauclair, who's in the kitchens, naked, looking for apple juice. Eventually, Beau passes out in his own kitchen, and Geralt then takes the apple juice and goes looking for Yennefer. He ultimately finds her in the midst of this orgy that she has created, and Geralt has a conversation with her about what he's doing there and what he needs, and reveals that he has a djinn, or that a djinn attacked Jaskier before she becomes incredibly interested and cuts off this orgy.
The orgy is a strange choice, I think, because obviously they wanted to show that Yennefer has really strong, mind control powers because of what happens later in the episode. She's really good at getting into people's heads and making them do what she wants. We already see that with Beau, and they could have shown it also with the porter. They could have made him seem like he was the way Beau Durant was, which is he's sort of out of it. So I don't know that they needed this, especially when the spell was over, because everybody in there seemed like they had no idea what was going on. And I was like, did Yennefer just sexually assault 200 people? What is this? Also added, I guess, maybe to the comedy a little bit of the scene, but that was a sort of an odd choice, I thought. It just was like, what am I supposed to be learning about Yennefer that she's doing this? I know someone said, well, it shows that her powers are stronger than when she conjured those people when she was with Istrid. But this is a different kind of magic. In that one, she was conjuring people from nothing. And this is about the mind control, which again is a plot point in the episode, is her ability to mind control. But I don't know about having this huge orgy. It just was like, why would you do that anyway? Like, you're bored, you're having a party, all these people come over, and then you just put a spell on all of them and then just sit there and you're not doing anything? There's a lot of elements of it that just seem like, what is she doing? I don't know.
Charlie, what are your thoughts on this scene?
At first, when I first saw it, I was the same as you. I didn't really know what purpose it served. And then the other day, I realized that maybe what they wanted to show with that is that she has the Rind authorities in her pocket. You know, they collect taxes from people who use magic and blah, blah. And Beauclair came and, you know, arrested her and told her she couldn't do what she wanted. And maybe this was kind of her way to get back at them, you know, and get some kind of pleasure out of the fact that she had the upper hand in the end.
Problem is, we don't know who any of those people are.
I know, yeah.
So it's like, I don't know that those are like the priest from the book, you know, that she's messing with.
Yeah.
They're just random people. She gets her revenge on Beau for sure, but that makes a lot of sense. But it would help if you knew that those were people that she didn't like.
Like, some of the curious things I think about that scene were, I think both of you touched on it, like, generally, what purpose does it serve? And if you think about the thing that's, you know, at the front of Yennefer's motivations, it's really a desire to feel loved and feel purpose and to be wanted unconditionally. It's curious that, like, she has this orgy in which she presumably, like, could be wanted under this spell, but then I think, as you said, Jess, she doesn't actually take part in it. So is she serving a purpose in giving other people that experience? Like, why would she take the opportunity to go and do this?
Yeah, that would work too, again, if when they came out of the spell, they were all happy that they were there, but they weren't. They were confused. And it's interesting too that she was not at all interested until Geralt came in. And then she was like really flirtatious, which I didn't notice until I watched it the second time. And I was like, she was just sitting there waiting for a hottie to walk in to like finally have some fun herself. I mean, the way it did work was to make Geralt seem very out of place. That added to some of the humor. And it also added to her being the person that he needed. Even the way they shot it, she's sort of standing on those stairs looking down at him. Yeah.
I also wonder if by having an entire room full of people, because in the books, Yennefer has a sexual relationship with Beauclair, but in the show, in having that whole room of people, it kind of removes her from that sexual relationship with Beau. So it just turns into like this whole thing. So I wonder if that was also part of the decision. Because aside from Istrid and Geralt, she doesn't have any relationships, like external affairs, throughout the show.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I think when Anya was interviewed about it, she talked about how Yennefer uses her sexuality. And I'm like, doesn't really. She's using her magic to control people. She's not using her sexuality. She does a little bit with Geralt in this episode. Like you said in the book, she has that affair with Beau. Like, she's actually sleeping with this guy, and because of that, this is the only reason she can stay in Rind, because she has him in her pocket, and she has that relationship. It feels like they've toned down that side to her a little bit. That she is very...
she's, like, cunning, yeah.
Yeah, she likes being controlled. She likes to plot things, but she wants to be very outspoken and straightforward about how she feels about things, but she doesn't really sexually manipulate. I mean, she magically sexually manipulated all those people in that room, but to no end, really. Because, like you said, if it was to get revenge, we don't know that those people were people she wanted to get revenge on in the first place. They didn't explain that. So it's really interesting. I mean, the good thing the scene did was to establish that these two actors who chemistry with each other, which is important for the long term.
I think they pulled that off really well, the infatuation with these two. I think the chemistry was really good throughout the scene. Yeah, they just made her less sexually manipulative as in the books, but more flirtatious in a way. But that's not the same thing, kind of. So I get where you're coming from, that she doesn't really use her sexuality. And I also think that it would have added to the scene if she had actually taken at least a sip from the apple juice he brought her, because they established just moments before in the kitchen, Beau is like, she always gets what she wants, and it's kind of weird that she wants the apple juice and then she just discards it. I mean, maybe that's to show how, starstruck she is seeing Geralt.
Yeah, she was too distracted by this hottie that walked in. Also, she didn't need the apple. Like, in the book, she needs apple juice for a very specific reason. And she doesn't need any here. She's just chilling.
Yeah, that's
She's
a good
fine.
point. Yeah.
Right after this initial moment in which they kind of first meet, and it's like kind of high passion, a lot of flirtation. After Geralt says that a djinn attacked Jaskier, Yennefer is immediately much more interested and invested in why he's here. So she cuts off all the music, stops the spell with the word ragamuffin, and then immediately dismisses everybody. And as we've said, everyone's kind of in a panic, looking for their clothes and rushing out, kind of confused.
I feel like you could at least let us sleep here after you put us through all this.
It's definitely big enough for some blankets and beanbags. And in the following scene, we get this very small, intimate moment, presumably in like a kitchen of sorts, where Yennefer and Geralt have a conversation. This scene is almost pulled exactly from the books. It's a very quiet, lead-in from the previous scene to the ones that follow, in which Yennefer just asks Geralt to take a bath.
Iconic.
Yeah, she has the famous line about how badly he smells.
Yeah.
It is interesting that she brought him clothes. Like, she was up there healing Jaskier, and that's all she could think about was like, God, he smells terrible, but he's so good looking, and maybe I'll just make him some new clothes and put him in a bathtub.
And Charlie, again, with the music in this scene, how would you say it impacted the overall storytelling, and what role did the score play in this part of the plot?
In the bath scene, the music really stood out to me because there's a few interesting elements about it. One of them is that personally, I don't know if that was the intention. I could imagine that it was, but it has some, elements in it that remind me of Renaissance dances, these slower paced concert music kind of stuff that they would play, Elizabethan courts and stuff like that, and stuff that you hear in those type of movies and TV shows as well. And I think that is a really nice reflection of their verbal sparring match that they have in this scene, like dancing, prancing around each other, insulting each other, but at the same time flirting with each other. And so I think that was really nice. And also what I realized the other day watching it, I don't know, I was ecstatic when I realized it. It was Yennefer's instrument in the series is an oboe. And in this scene, you can hear the oboe playing Geralt's theme. And I think that's very telling and encapsulates their relationship that's to come from this really nicely. And I love that. I love that they did that.
I just got chills from you just saying that.
It's like foreshadowing through the music.
It's really beautiful. The music producers behind the show do a really beautiful job of like weaving those stories and those vocalized and unvocalized intentions and desires throughout the show into the score.
I was going to say another example of a very smart adaptation, not only in terms of having a good interaction between the actors, but also budget-wise, was having Yennefer not turn invisible here, to have them in the bath together, where he can't see her, just as he can't in the books, but they still have something to act off of. There's something still very intimate about it as they're sitting with their backs to each other. I thought that was a really smart decision.
And the composition of just having them be parallel like that is really beautiful. And then you could see, like, proportionally, like, just how huge Henry Cavill really is.
Yeah, sometimes you don't think about it too much when he's by himself, and then you see him next to other people. Sometimes I felt bad for the horse, even. Like, when he had Jaskier with him on the horse, I was
gosh.
This was a scene that had another moment where I wasn't sure what they were trying to say, which is how the scene ends. He says, after I've paid for your kind services, blah, blah, and she says, well, I've decided that your company and conversation is enough. And then he is very annoyed and gets out of the bathtub. And I was like, is he under the impression that he was going to pay for services by sleeping with her? And now he's upset because he's not going to get laid?
I hope not.
So he gets out of the bathtub. Like, I didn't quite follow what she meant by that. And then at the very end, she says, what's the matter? Water doesn't suit. I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about.
No, same. I have no clue. I've been wondering that ever since the first time I saw it. I just don't understand what they're getting at here. It doesn't make any sense. So that makes me think that it's editing and that it just got, edited out.
I think the only other possible explanation would be that when she says her services would be free, maybe he's annoyed because he knows well enough that he's going to have a price to pay. Like, it's going to be something unexpected. It's going to be something that he potentially can't afford. It's going to be something that's going to be a lot more painful to him than just coin.
Right, but he said at the beginning when he gave her the thing, didn't he, that whatever you ask, I'll pay it.
He does say that, and then when they actually get into the tub, I think, he's like, did I just sign myself up for indentured servitude? I'm afraid I can't afford you. Maybe it's a skepticism.
Well, why is he mad then?
I don't know.
That's the thing I don't get. He's like very annoyed and he gets out of the bathtub. And I'm like, shouldn't he be relieved?
Yeah.
Great, we're even. See ya. So there's a couple moments in this episode where I like wish I could ask the showrunner, what was that supposed to mean? And this is one of those moments where I just don't quite follow. Yeah, it is a great scene all the way through, I think. Seeing them peel things back on each other without ever saying anything. He notices that she's had something done to her physically. He notices the scars on her wrists. She realizes that his wish for sleep isn't really about sleep. Like, there's something else beneath it that's causing it. If it had been about sleep, he could have just asked her to fix it. He didn't. She points that out. So I think maybe more so than other characters, they sort of understand each other a little bit. They understand that there's other things going on deeper, that they both have a lot of baggage. They both have a lot that they don't say. So in that sense, it was a very nice scene, I think.
Yeah, now that you said scars, that's, she looks at his scars, studies his scars, and a minute later he refers to her scars on her wrist. So it's like she notices his and he notices hers, and that's kind of a common ground they have as well. So one of the things on their common ground. It's a very symmetrical scene. The way they're sitting back to back, and then what they say to each other, and
they both make very smart comments and very,
Yeah, and whatever kind of trust and vulnerability that they have there is kind of broken then in the second scene.
Before we get to the climax of Geralt and Yennefer's storyline, we're going to hand it off to Lars and Witcherflix for recent news on the Netflix show. When we come back, Charlie, Jess, and I will continue our discussion of Bottled Appetites.
Hey, it's Lars from Witcherflix, and this is Tidings from Toussaint. Welcome back, everybody. If you're craving for new material from The Witcher on Netflix, your prayers were answered. Netflix released not one, but 2 documentaries about season 1 of The Witcher show. The first one is called Making the Witcher. The whole crew, including actors, writers, producers, designers, and other people from the set, describe what working on season 1 of The Witcher was like. In addition, the documentary goes into extensive detail when it comes to the creative work. Writer Sneha Corsi, for example, talked about how the writing process went. She said, "In the writer's room for The Witcher we get together and we bat around ideas for a while until we have a clearer picture of what we're doing for this season, and once we do that, we go into individual episodes and draw from the books. Like, what from the books do we want to bring into this season? Once we decide that Lauren sends us off, and we write our individual scripts and we have certain storylines that carry through from one episode to another, that we keep batting back and forth to make sure that we're always giving new information to the audience." The runtime for Making the Witcher is 32 minutes, and it's out now on Netflix. The other new documentary is called The Witcher: A Look Inside the Episodes. This is where showrunner Lauren Hissrich takes the center stage. In 8 episodes, each 5 to 8 minutes long, she talks about the story of season 1 and its characters, and what the thought process behind writing this season looked like. Lauren revealed some interesting tidbits that gave new perspectives on things that are much talked about in season 1. For example, she talks about Ciri's adventure in Brokilon Forest and the mysteries surrounding the Dryad's holy tree. Lauren said, "Shen Kayan is a tree which the Dryads are worshipping. There's a voice at the end that booms, 'What are you, child?' And it's the first inclination the Dryads have that she, Ciri, is special, that there's something bigger about her. But as the series continues, much later, we're gonna start to get into exactly what voice was speaking to her and what agenda that voice has. It's a mystery, actually, that we're gonna keep building up throughout the series." As if that wasn't enough, showrunner Lauren Hissrich also did a nice little Q&A on Twitter, where she revealed even more secrets about season 1. She revealed that they left the actors room for improvising. Lauren said, "The worst thing that I can do is not leave room for breathing and adjusting in scenes. The actors embody these characters for so long. and often have great pitches that strike a specific tone. Jaskier's entire speech about berries in episode 106 was on the fly. Moreover, Lauren answered the question what it was like to work with Mayanna Buring, the actress who played Tessaya de Vries. She said, Mayanna is a pro, prepared and spot on, and pulled together exactly like her character. She's also a mother in real life and held me in her arms the very first time my kids had to leave after a visit to Budapest, because I felt so broken. She's kindness epitomized. In addition, Lauren was also asked about her favorite scene in season 1 that used a lot of special effects. She answered, the Battle of Sodden. Hands down, magical portals, arrows, fire, and also it was shot in 2 different countries, and then all joined together in post-production. In other news, the casting process for the Witcher prequel miniseries, Blood Origin, has already begun. Just like for the main show, Sophia Holland casting is in charge. Blood Origin will consist of 6 episodes and is set 1,200 years before the events of The Witcher, and will likely start filming next year. And of course, as soon as casting starts, there are already rumors floating around. According to Redanian intelligence, Netflix is looking to cast Jason Momoa for Blood Origin. He is best known for roles such as Khal Drogo on Game of Thrones and Aquaman. According to Redanian intelligence's sources, Netflix wants to cast him as the first Witcher ever created. The overall source for this rumor is Production Weekly, a professional and reliable website collecting data on projects in the film and TV business. So, hard to say how legit this rumor is. But the thought alone that Jason Momoa could play a Witcher is awesome enough. Of course, Jason already added fuel to the fire when he posted an Instagram story showing a picture of himself as a Witcher next to Henry Cavill as Geralt. Well, we will see. And lastly, what's new for the main show? According to Redanian intelligence, the cast and crew are filming a big action scene at the moment. It takes place in the set for Kaer Morhen and involves several Witchers. Geralt, Ciri, Vesemir, Lambert, Eskel, Cohen, and several original Witchers. Among them a new character named Hamrick. The original Witchers are mostly played by stuntmen. In other main show news, Redanian intelligence reported that the Witcher production prepares to film at Fountains Abbey in North Yorkshire, UK. The ruins of a monastery founded in 1132 had been visited by the Witcher crew several times before, most recently by Season 2 director Sarah O'Gorman. Of course, the question now is, what scenes could they be filming at Fountains Abbey? The obvious answer is that the ruins could serve as the Witcher fortress of Kaer Morhen, which will play an important role in Season 2. Another possibility is that the abbey could portray Sheraved, a ruined palace of the elves that appears in the book Blood of Elves. Anyway guys, that's it for me for today. I hope you all stay safe and well. We talk again in the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair. Until then, thanks again for listening and good luck on the path.
Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. I'm here with Charlie and Jess discussing Bottled Appetites from Netflix's The Witcher. When we left off, Geralt had sought out Yennefer to heal Jaskier after a djinn attack. After their fateful meeting and moments of vulnerability between the Witcher and Sorceress, Yennefer's intentions are revealed.
In the scene that follows, Geralt discovers Yennefer's intention to kind of like capture this djinn. The drawing from the top of the seal is inscribed onto the floor. There's candles. Jaskier is kind of on the bed in a coma of some sort. Geralt realizes that Yennefer is trying to capture the djinn.
Yes. This was an odd scene to follow the previous one. I think it was kind of the way it was shot. She looks very small, and they use a lot of wide shots in it, so you can see the pentagram floor, so you can see all that. But there's something about like her posture and the way she was standing next to him in parts of the scene that didn't feel like she was in control. Like, in that scene, she's very much in control. Because what she's doing, you find out at the end, is she's very slowly working her way into his mind to get him to do what she wants, and to get him to reveal information. So there were little elements in it about the way it was shot that felt like they weren't conveying what we were supposed to feel about it. She wasn't flirtatious, but she also wasn't this proud sorceress either. She was somewhere in the middle, like she was just waiting for him to finally click and feel it, I guess. It's the first appearance, too, I think, though, of her perfume, which is kind of an important...
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that she actively uses her scent as a weapon in this scene. And I mean, she kind of does in the book. It kind of has this effect on people. At this point, she doesn't, like, put it on just to put someone under a spell or something. So I thought it was interesting. But then again, I get why they did that, because it's TV and they have to show stuff to people. You know, we are not in Geralt's head. We don't read about how he's obsessed with her scent throughout the entire short story. So
don't know what it smells like until they say it.
Yeah. So yeah, they kind of had to get that in there.
Although I think it's interesting because the way they brought it in, you could almost assume that the scent is what made him mind controlled, which we know is not the case. Her perfume doesn't mind control people. It's her magic. But because of the way the scene was set up, because he says that scent, lilac, and she goes, and gooseberries. And I know some people were like, is that what made her control him, is this scent?
I want to try that with my husband.
I actually haven't.
Me too.
But I do think his performance was good. The way he actually acted out the realizing she was in his mind and he was frozen, and that whole part I think worked really well.
And at the end of this, we do see Geralt fall into some sort of trance, and ultimately that scene kind of cuts to black. The scene that follows opens with Geralt coming to in a prison, and he's with Corydon, the elf who we met in the beginning of the episode, who tells him, basically hangover style, everything that happened to Geralt since the day before, in which Geralt just went on a rampage through the town, beating some of the town council members on Yennefer's behalf.
This would be a way you could show that those people in the orgy were the people she didn't like, would be if you could see some of the people in the orgy, and then they actually showed Geralt going, and that's double punishment. That's extra meat.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I know a lot of people wish they would have shown him actually doing this, because it would have been pretty funny. It would have made a ridiculous montage. It would have been very close to being, stupid. So I think they played it safe.
Yeah, too ridiculous,
Yeah.
There is a lot for audience member to kind of unearth between the previous scene and this one, though. It's not totally clear that Geralt's doing her bidding would be the immediate outcome for Yennefer putting him to sleep. As an audience member, it's just wait, how did this happen? And then they're just in a prison.
Some people thought she put him in prison. She put him to sleep and then, thrown in jail. Until the explanation came.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of reactions to these episodes, and that was one of the things that came up. They were like, wait, did she throw him in jail? Did she have him arrested?
Harsh.
No, she had him do something much more useful.
Having that be a little unclear, I think it takes away from how manipulative Yennefer could be. It's very clear in the books, for example, that she's sending him out to do her bidding, and he has no control over that. It's not totally clear in this series that that's what she's using him for until it kind of gets explained secondhand.
Same as the sexually manipulating people. Her manipulations aren't quite as in your face on the show. Actually, I hope when we get to the book comparison part to talk about how different Yennefer is in this story than she is in the book, because she's quite different.
I think they just wanted to make her more likable for a wider audience, and that's why they didn't go as far as making her super manipulative as she is in the books, because that could, throw people off. People would go, why exactly is he into her? Because it's difficult, I think, to get that across on TV, so they kind of tried to find a middle ground here, and I think they did well. I mean, it's just different, but it's not bad or anything, so it works very well.
It is interesting that they thought about that, because you would think after what she went through in the first couple episodes, that would be enough for the audience to be on her side in some ways, even if she did manipulate Geralt, and we did see it much more, in your face, because we understand what she's doing and why she's doing it. We already know about sort of her baby desire. I think they did think they wanted her to be more likable in a way, and it is interesting that they thought they needed her to be. What came before wouldn't have been enough. They already expanded her entire backstory. I mean, in the books, we don't know anything about her, and the first thing you see is pretty intense and can be pretty malicious, and you don't know anything about her.
That's a really good point. Her likability as a character, as a heroine, also takes priority along with her own character development.
It's unfortunate that happens, though, a lot with female characters, I think. Female characters have to be likable.
I'm trying to think of female characters that are really, really vicious, that are still likable in their brutality.
Maybe Cersei Lannister would be one that's not. We like her because she's so terrible.
Yeah.
It's true.
But she's also not the protagonist. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion.
I'm sure we'll get the opportunity, hopefully, to talk about brutal female characters down the line, I think. After Geralt wakes up in this prison, we cut back to Yennefer's quarters, and Jaskier awakes as Yennefer prepares herself to capture the djinn, and she threatens him into making what she thinks is Jaskier's last wish.
Can I just say that I love that Toss a Coin is in this scene almost like a character, and throughout the entire season, it's not just a track on a soundtrack or a track we hear as the end credits roll. It's actually incorporated into the world these characters live in, and people sing it in taverns, and Jaskier brings it up. She prompts him to do so, to practice some scales, and he sings that song that he's become famous with and Geralt became famous with. And it's just so cool that they made it a character. They made the song a character within the Witcher universe almost. It's pretty cool.
That's a really beautiful way of putting it. We hear kind of secondhand that Jaskier is part of the reason why Geralt becomes so famous, but it's so concrete in the series because we get to see the formation of that song all the way through, the rest of the series.
I thought it was interesting that they have Yennefer in this scene painting an amphora on her body. It looks like a uterus.
I think that's the intention.
The orgy scene we've already talked about, but this would be the one other scene in this episode where the nudity to me was just unnecessary. It wasn't distracting and then I couldn't pay attention to what was going on, but it took me out of the scene. And I think what really did it was her putting her dress back on, but then not covering herself. I don't know any woman that would do that.
That's weird.
Especially when the guy on the bed is not the guy she's been flirting with.
Yeah.
She puts her dress back on and then doesn't cover herself and is just walking around like that. And I was like, we saw the amphora, so we saw that. That's fine. We get it. And then after that, it's like, I don't understand the reason. Why? I don't get it.
Yeah.
Again, like we said before the show, I asked other women who watched the show, did you notice this or was it just me? And they were like, yeah, I noticed it too. So it's not just, being prudish or whatever. I want it to have a purpose. Because again, the bathtub scene, you're naked in a bathtub. I had no problem with that. But this is once we see the amphora that she draws on, it doesn't need to be there.
Definitely.
It definitely seemed like more than was necessary. I agree that they probably could have used a tight shot of the amphora. And because there's a belly button, presumably around that area, we have context as to what's happening right now.
I mean, even the nudity at that point, when she's actually drawing it, it's okay. But again, she literally puts her dress on, and it's just sort of weird. When it's that much, you start thinking I don't know, as a woman, I start thinking, well, Henry Cavill's not getting naked on this show. She's been naked several times already. She's a new actress, a young new actress. I kind of feel bad for her. I mean, these thoughts just start creeping in when you're supposed to be focusing on, Jaskier.
Kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
It does. It leaves a little bit of a strange, yeah. But it was funny. Jaskier was funny. Their interaction was really funny. I left my cat on the stove was great.
I wonder if he improvised that.
I wouldn't be surprised if he improvised a lot of lines. Joey Beatty specifically.
I think he said in an interview recently that he ended up with many of the lines that were originally Henry Cavill's because they decided to make Geralt more grunty and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
just grunty.
Yeah. But they still needed someone to drive the plot forward, of course. So he ended up with lots of the lines that weren't originally his and had to improvise a lot there.
What can happen sometimes too when there's just a line like that, at least in comedy shows, is they've obviously written a joke there and then maybe he has an idea of something else he could say. There might have been 3 or 4 other options of something he said there. And that was the one they went with.
Maybe one day we'll get to ask Joey Beatty what lines and scenes he improvised on the show. I think Geralt realizes why she has the amphora later in the scene. He says somewhere, I think, that she's trying to become a vessel for the djinn.
To become more powerful, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, at no point does he realize that this is about her fertility in this episode.
The parallels between the amphora and a uterus, being drawn on her abdomen, do speak back to one, that quest to cure her infertility, and then also just, the desire to be the capsule or the house for this djinn. So I would say it serves a dual purpose.
To literally have everything.
Yeah. After Yennefer threatens Jaskier into making his last wish, we switch back to the prison, in which Geralt is beaten by a guard who he wishes to burst, and the guard then bursts.
Wish number 2. I did like the effect of the head bursting. I sort of skipped through it frame by frame. I think the blood and guts that end up on Raiden's face are real. but the explosion of his head is VFX. So what they probably did is the guy pretended like his head was going to burst, and then someone shouted, "Burst!" and then somebody threw that stuff on the actor that plays Drayden. And then later the head gets VFX'd as if it explodes. Also, I'm kind of glad they didn't blow him up completely, like the whole body, because that would have been really gross.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was already pretty gross as is.
It looked pretty good. It looked good.
But yeah, at this point, Geralt and Kraden are starting to realize that Geralt is now the one with the wishes, as opposed to Jaskier, contrary to what Yennefer thinks.
This is also, I think, the first time that he points out to Geralt, he does it again later, that he understands why you would like Yennefer. Like, that comes up again later. We also have the visual of the cuts on his arm, which I think was really smart to do for a visual medium.
Yeah.
Especially since the first one with the twist itself was kind of covered because he's picking up the amphora pieces. But then we see, like, it's actually the wish counting.
Which is a pretty brutal way to be not even punished, but just to, like, have that, like, blood sacrifice as part of a wish.
Yeah, djinns are not pleasant. Not many things are pleasant in The Witcher, though, monster-wise.
I think it's great that they kept, are we saying Curaden?
Whatever you want to say.
Okay, I'm just going to say Curaden. I don't know.
The only elf in this story, we could probably just say the elf.
The elf, that they kept the elf's line about the spider and the lovely tail.
It's almost as if he thought, like, a scorpion was prettier than a spider because it has such a lovely tail. Something like that.
Yeah, I think it's cool that they kept that in. I cracked up at his delivery. I think the actor for Curaden is hilarious. I don't know why.
He's very sincere.
Yeah.
He plays it all very sincerely.
His face is so pure and he's just...
Yeah.
He comes across as really pure. Yeah.
It's surprising because of, like, how meek his character appears and how strong Yennefer also comes across in this section. You almost wonder what kind of happened when they actually met and how that dynamic played out, because you never actually see it on screen. You just hear that Kraden had met her.
The way he's played, he strikes me as someone who is very competent and confident in what he knows and very clear-headed. So I think coming across this woman who is also very clear about what she wants, it's very beautiful. She's, like, very sexy and everything. And I think all that combined, you can kind of see why he took a fancy to her. The way he plays it also, you can see that he took a fancy to her with the knowledge that nothing would ever come from it. You know, that he's very aware that he was not her type. He really liked her anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas in the book, he is way more hopeful a bit. Like, it seems to me in the book, reading it, he's so in love with her and under her spell, and he does things for her. He doesn't help Geralt, you know, because he's afraid that he will do something to Yennefer.
Well, the men in the book kind of tend to do pretty stupid stuff regarding Yennefer. Yeah. Like, that's a pretty common theme in the book, is, like, men being kind of dumb about her.
Unfortunately. And I mean, she has that effect on everyone, but as we said, like, she uses that completely to her advantage. This is a topic that we'll even see throughout the rest of the series as well. The next few scenes cover Yennefer's attempts to capture the djinn. We see Yennefer attempting to summon it with the amphora. She's in a lot of pain. We then see Jaskier leaving the house, who then runs into Geralt and Kraden on his way out because Yennefer had let him go. Geralt then runs inside the house, attempts to save Yennefer, who's trying to make herself the vessel for the djinn. Yennefer, then possessed by the djinn, begs for Geralt to make his last wish, and he does, and the djinn escapes.
I was wondering, would Yennefer have let Geralt rot in a cell? I mean, I'm sure she thinks that he would find a way out anyway, but if Jaskier in that moment hadn't mentioned, like I mentioned earlier, the sexy witch, Geralt wouldn't have asked about her, and would he just have left and not given her a second thought in the series, in the scenario?
But Jaskier saw Yennefer when they first walked into the orgy, so, like, they know that they all know each other.
Yeah.
But he's describing her as if he doesn't know that Geralt knows who that is. There was a very sexy witch with dark hair and blah, blah, and it's like, no, you both walked into that orgy and saw her sitting there. So you both know who it is. She would have just left Geralt in prison. Jaskier would have gotten healed, left, not known where Geralt was, but somehow he was there. Also, Jaskier says to him, is this the time you're finally going to care about someone other than yourself? I was trying to think if that's actually true, because Jaskier wasn't there with the Striga. Maybe he doesn't know about that. But I feel like it's not the first time Geralt has cared about someone other than himself, is it?
He did care about the elves, kinda.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's just from Jaskier's perspective, because the scenes that we got with Geralt and Jaskier were, as you said, Charlie, the adaptation of The Edge of the World in episode 2. We got the Feast of Cintra in episode 4, and then now this. So
that's what I was trying to think. Like, maybe he hasn't been there because he wasn't there for the Striga. That's a bit of a self-sacrifice, going in and saving that girl instead of killing her. So, yeah, maybe he hasn't been there. But I love the performance of her getting possessed. I thought that worked really well. The sound effects worked really, really well. I mean, like the bone creaking noises when she was like bending backwards, and like the gin effects worked. All that, I think, sold it really well. Yeah, the only thing I didn't like was when he first comes in the room and just the look on his face when he goes, "I'm here to help you." He looks like a sad puppy or something. I've never seen him look like that at any point on the show before or after. So it was kind of a strange performance in that moment. I do think it's funny, though, that they're having this argument, right? Like, Yennefer's like, "I'll give you the last wish, stop trying to become possessed," and blah, blah, blah. And they're going back and forth. And he says, "Just tell me what you want." And it was like, all she had to do was say what her wish was. It just would have been over. She could have got what she wanted. He would have got what he wanted in that moment, which was for her to, like, stop. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I think she just says everything and then throws him against the wall.
I thought, again, the music was really interesting because as Geralt makes his wish, and also the moments building up to that, we again hear Yen's oboe playing in the background, and it's a really climactic version of her theme on top of some of Geralt's theme. We hear it in the background, slightly tuned down, and it's just, they're coming together in this moment with the wish and everything, and it's just beautiful that they use the music that way. That just works really well.
It's always a good sign when the score has a lot of meaning behind it.
Yeah.
And it's not overpowering in the sense that, like, if you asked me right now what the score sounded like when I watched it, I couldn't tell you. Because it's playing at the right level. It's there in your head sort of subconsciously, and they're doing these little things to, like, foreshadow things or tell you things through the music. But it's not, like, taking over the scene. It's, like, a nice support to what you're watching. I think they did a really good job of that.
Yeah. I laughed so hard at, "Are you perhaps short of a marble?" line from Jaskier. I thought, that's another kind of modern expression, isn't it? But it's just
yeah.
He's hilarious.
I think it says a lot about their relationship, kind of the exasperation that Jaskier has just for Geralt's actions. Conversely, like, how annoyed...
Just weird, because I would be way more annoyed with Jaskier if I was Geralt, you know?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, so I think it does say a lot about their relationship and how they prioritize and value different things and how they act upon those. So we were talking about the end of the gin fight, and Charlie, you had a note in here about how the musical themes incorporate with each other and mix throughout this battle scene.
Yeah, because Yen's oboe theme, oboe, right? It's oboe. Okay. So Yen's oboe theme, like her instrument is playing as Geralt makes his wish, and I think that's pretty cool. Underlying, we have Geralt's hurdy-gurdy as well, which is driving the whole thing. As these two come together on screen and with the wish and are linked together, we hear the themes as well, and that's, of course, good.
And we kind of get to see the culmination of this intertwining of, like, destinies and of character development, you know, through the end of Geralt and Yennefer's story. We're brought to the exterior of Beauberon's home, and Creighton and Jaskier mourn Geralt and Yennefer, who they assume to be dead. At this point, Yennefer and Geralt fall through the floor after the djinn is released, after he makes his last wish. And after a moment of anger, they quickly and desperately make love to a jig, of all things. Creighton and Jaskier see them through the window. Creighton pulls Jaskier away. And the close of their segment is just Yennefer and Geralt chatting briefly after this very quick moment of passion. Geralt falls asleep before telling Yennefer what he had wished for.
Yeah, I'm very, very curious where they're going with this. Her not hearing the wish. Obviously, as we've brushed on this, the relationship is different to what it is in the books. They don't arrive at this point in the show. And the lovemaking scene at the end, it's not as tender as it was in the books, because she's not touched by his gesture of, you know, saving her. I think that's a very important element that's just different on the show. But we'll see how it'll turn out.
Yeah.
I think that was, like, one of the things I noticed about the show overall, is the relationships develop at a different pace
Yeah.
than they do in the books. Like, the show gets to the end of the last short story, plot-wise, I think the character relationships aren't caught up to where those relationships are at the end. Especially since over the course of the whole novel series, they don't spend that much time together. It'll be interesting how it develops over time. Yeah, this scene is an example of two people who have been very attracted to each other for the whole episode, who finally, in the joy of not being dead, but being very annoyed about what's just happened, have sex in what was previously, I believe, the orgy room. So very appropriate, maybe.
Yeah, it was.
I thought it was interesting how when the djinn was defeated, there was like this moment of nothing. Then all of a sudden, the roof collapsed. And then we cut to the outside of the house, and you see the djinn sort of leaving through the roof. Inside that room, like, you didn't see the djinn at all. You didn't see it struggling to get out of the roof. Like, they literally just went calm, and then the roof cracked, and then we just cut outside for all the, like, the effect shots of the djinn. But it would have been interesting if they gave it this moment where, like, oh, the spell is over, the fight is over, you know, the amphora thing blows up off her stomach and blows away. So they gave it this, like, beat, and then the disaster of the house coming down.
I think that was saving on the budget.
Actually, if you look at how much time it is between when they realize the house is collapsing and we cut to them arriving in that room, that's like the longest portal for the shortest distance ever.
I know, and also the way they fell through it.
It's like 30 seconds for them to travel like 3 floors.
But I mean, Geralt points this out. He's like, if you were to portal us out of here, you might as well have just, taken us to safety instead of the same house. We're still in it.
I think he made a very good point.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that as a release of emotion, who knows what kind of emotion, they just make love. Just very urgent and desperate love. And then it's over quite quickly.
Yeah.
With a great musical score here. This is one of the pieces of music that I did notice, and I thought it was fantastic. Tone of it worked. I thought the fact that it was literally like an audio representation of the sex they were having, like it sped up toward the end until it ended. And it fit with the tone of the show. It's like, it's kind of funny, kind of ridiculous. They almost died. This is a very serious thing that just happened, but then we immediately switched to something that's sort of funny, and I think that fits sort of The Witcher in general.
Yeah, what you noted about it not taking itself too seriously, and that's definitely reflected in the music. And then he finally gets his much-needed sleep.
Which added actually another, because there's a lot of discussion about what his wish is. There's no build-up to what it could be, the way there is in the books, where there's a little bit of an explanation, the priest or somebody. There's not a lot of indication of what the wish could be, except through the music, which you pointed out. That could give you, like, a little clue. Some people were like, oh, he wished to sleep. Well, no, that couldn't have been the wish, because if that was the wish, the djinn would have still killed her. I just think it's interesting the story is how many years old, and people still, like, have debates about what he actually said. And I think actually you only really know the answer to what his wish was at the end of the entire series.
Yeah.
So.
I think the difference between the Netflix series here and this point is that we do find out in the following episode 106, what that wish is.
I'll just say this. I don't totally trust Borsch's predictions. Something about them were a little bit off.
I think to kind of talk about what worked well in the context of the rest of the series and this specific episode. Obviously, it introduces Geralt and Yennefer to each other and Jaskier all together so that we establish kind of a relationship between them. And it does serve as a continuation for each of their individual character arcs in which Geralt is seeking some sort of reprieve, Yennefer is still seeking a child, and it drives them toward the next episode as well.
Before we get to series storyline and comparisons to the books, we're going to end today's discussion here. Join Charlie, Jess, and I in the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair for our continued discussion of Netflix's The Witcher 105, Bottled Appetites. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms listening services, head over to breakfastinbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa at the Tidings from Toussaint, news segment by Alyssa Mitchellflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with the Breakfast in Beauclair theme by Mojo Filter Media and the Tidings from Toussaint theme by Tina Campamanes. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Covia, the owner of the Trailer's Porpoise, Eric Segalden, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Julie, Sylvia of Skellige, Jameson, Ava of Gullet, B. Haven at the Edge of the World, Jacob Meeks, Sebastian von Novigrad, Charlotte Fingerberg, Glamry, Red Kite, the original Roche, Ariel, Kitty, the one-true chef, Justin, and Chris K. of Covier. Special thanks to Charlie and Jess S. for joining us for this episode and our international Hanza for their support.